Hi class, this is school social work. So let's get started, or social work in a school setting. So we are here with our learning outcomes, so please read below. The most important would be to be attentive to describe the history of social work in schools, identify and discuss major social work roles in schools, explain the impact of diversity in school settings, and discuss social work values in school settings and how law and policy implications affect it. And then finally, we will look at the similarities and differences between school social work in the USA setting and Ghana setting. So Lisa and Laura Santiago are our case studies. These are important things to be aware of. And so as you complete your multidimensional framework assessment, I would use some of these bullet points as a guide to assist you. So professional competencies, school social workers will always attend to professional roles and boundaries. So this is very vital. We have to remember because we're working with children, and typically the relationship between the school social worker and the child in need is very intense. And so, but we must always be aware of professional boundaries and roles and how to practice in that setting. And also, one vital thing would be to always understand and critique and apply and understand the person and environment, the ecosystem perspective, human behavior in the social environment. And then we have our competencies with the plan change processing of engagement, assessment, intervening, and evaluation. So this slide here talks briefly about people of Latino or Hispanic heritage. And this is the largest minority group right now in the United States. Approximately 18% of the United States population, and is a very diverse population of people, including Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Central Americans, Mexicans. And so we just need to be very much aware of that. As school social workers, we may be helping a member within this population and others as well, minority members within these populations. So history of school social work in the early years, we should be aware of the Settlement House liaison schools in New York. And what did that become? Please refer to your book. Then also the psychological clinic liaison schools in Connecticut. It's very important to note that in the 1920s, the school social worker role was to reduce delinquency and improve mental health. Remember, children were still working outside the home, and the way in which children were being seen had recently changed. So it was vital to get these children back into a school setting. And so 1930s, with the Great Depression, they located and distributed food, shelter, and clothing. As we continue, one other thing to note is the 1970s development of school social work systems theory and ecological perspective was very influential with this population. So you definitely want to read about that and reference your book. Then the 1964 Economic Opportunity Act to create a Head Start. You need to know what Head Start is, especially as a school social worker. It'll be very beneficial to you. So please reference your book for that too. In 1975, we had the Education for All Handicapped Children, created new roles for school social workers as part of the special education team. 1970s, the National Association of Social Workers developed standards for school social work. Please reference your book for both of those points as well. The other things to note is with the growth of children, poverty, and homelessness, the roles of school social workers definitely are beyond counseling. Case management and linkagers vital as a school social worker. And then also you need to understand the impact of poverty on school performance, right? So our Maslow's basic needs. If we don't have food, shelter, and housing, how can we focus on anything else? So those are things that we, as school social workers, will be working on to help our patients and their families. And then school social workers, a certification. Here in Illinois, we have to have the Type 73, meaning you have to be typically a clinical social worker first, and then you go and get certified as a Type 73 social worker so that you can be labeled as a school social worker. So social workers' roles in schools very unique based off of the demographics of the population and the needs of the population. However, these are general. So working with individuals, of course, families with their children. Some work with organizations, communities to influence law and resources available to the students. And then school linked integrated services. So they typically are the liaison between the school and community resources. Impact of diversity, we know diversity is very vital in the United States right now. So cultural diversity leads um, many different minority groups and majority groups, and so this is reflected in school settings. Typically, though, our at-risk populations are very diverse cultures, and so we need to be aware of those as school social workers. Please reference your book in regards to the bilingual model and the sheltered English immersion model. It's vital to always understand cultural norms and be aware of alternative and charter schools that may be present for our students or children at school who might be needing a school social worker or who are at risk. So the special needs, the IDA requires the school social workers to be part of a multidisciplinary team. So please be aware of that and what that team consists of. The school social worker is just one portion of it. The social workers evaluate children. They do education evaluation as applied research. And they also make sure the child is in the least restrictive environment. So school social workers with other special needs children. So this is the ordeal of the 2K brothers. Please read this in your book, but these bullet points are very good. It beliefs and actions of some people in society can create clients for social workers in special education. That's very true. And these can be gay and lesbian students. So we need to have our value and our diversity and, you know, be very alert to this and see how these people might be at need. And then the role of school, the role of social work too. So student rights and the law. Many court filings affect students in public schools, right? Because policy affects people. So it can be elementary, secondary, or universities. The political leanings of judges may influence their rulings, and political leanings of litigants influence the nature of the cases they bring to the court, right? So there's politics heavily enmeshed or embedded in, working with children and adults and teenagers across the setting as a school social worker. Social work values in school setting, policy implications. So a key thing that they do is development of special education programs, values of fairness and individual worth and dignity of all clients need to be the guide for that. And the issues of homophobia, heterosexism, and support of protective laws and full civil rights for people with same-sex orientation and other families. So they're advocates, right? Advocates, advocates, advocates. Please read through this slide. It's very important. Reference your book for more details. So bullying and violence in school. So these are many different forms. Bullying has a definition here. There's also many different forms. It can be verbal, physical, social, and cyberbullying. There's a zero tolerance policy in most places, although our presidents may not act like that. An entire school system and climate surrounding the school must be addressed, right? That's the liaison. And the school social worker needs to be aware of that or work as a team with other social workers to address this bullying that may be going on in whatever form. And then we need to imply universal school-based programs must be delivered to all students. So nutrition and achievement. So 2013, Congress decreased net benefits for people. So this is always an effect because we know that children and at-risk families utilize SNAP benefits. So food deserts, places with limited access to fresh produce, children become obese. We see this in the cities when we see stores on the corners who don't have actually nutritious food. They have high sodium food, high fat foods in the form of candy, chips, things like that. And then also, or if they do have fresh foods, which they really don't, it's much more expensive for the fresh produce. So, what does a person pick if they have a limited income? Do they get the $3-4 ramen noodles, or do they get the $3 apples? So it's common sense that they're going to get as much as they can because they have a limited income. And school social workers can assist by providing information about resources. So the No Child Left Behind was a very good, wasn't acted in 2002. I wouldn't say it's very good, but you need to be aware of that. But most importantly, the new version or the modified version now is the 2015 Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESA. So a state-driven test, federal funding is dedicated to lowest performing schools. Please reference your previous slide for the ESA and be aware of that to see, I would think, is it a good act? Is it productive? Is it fair across the board? Those are things we should be thinking of. So reference your slide for that, the previous slide. So spiritual development and empowerment. So there's a separation of church and state. Then be aware of, social workers should be aware of social emotional learning, right? The settings that they're in and that everyone doesn't learn the same or maybe on a different emotional level, these children. Current trends. So the rate of child poverty in the U.S. is 1 in 5, seems likely to increase. So that's 20% of children. There's a big gap between the wealth and the poor, and then the TANF benefits are being reduced at an increased number of alternative and charter schools for behavioral issues or, you know, just to really help these children. So we need to be aware of all of this. An international comparison, school social work in Ghana, it's, geared towards labor, child labor, poverty, and child trafficking. And school social workers assist children who are hungry, homeless, neglected, abandoned, abused, exhausted, frequently truant, engaged in prostitution, addicted to alcohol, drugs, and gambling, bullied, sold as children, child laborers, or challenged with various psychological and other disabilities. So definitely a full multidimensional framework. They work in biological, psychological, and social dimensions. So that's school social work. Please reach out to your professor if you have any concerns and reference our PowerPoints, notations with your book. Thank you.